You're just a lowly maid, and you ruined my wedding. Charlotte Wentworth's accusation echoed through the glittering Willowcrest estate, pinning Olivia Harper, a stunning black maid, under the gaze of Atlanta's elite. A shattered vase lay at her feet, blamed on her, though she never touched it. What happens next will leave you speechless. Where are you listening from? Drop your city in the comments and tell us. What do you think Olivia did in the face of this public humiliation? Stick around. This story of courage and defiance is one you won't forget. If you love gripping tales that spark change, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for our latest videos. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let's build this community together. Will Olivia bow to pressure, or will she rewrite the script? Comment, subscribe, and let's dive in. The air at Willowcrest Estate shimmered with opulence, a golden haze settling over the manicured gardens, where Atlanta's elite gathered for the wedding of the season. Crystal chandeliers swayed gently in the open-air pavilion, casting prisms of light across tables draped in ivory silk. Orchids spilled from silver vases, and the clink of champagne flutes wove through the hum of polished conversation. It was a scene meticulously crafted, every detail a testament to the Wentworth family's wealth and influence. At the heart of it all stood Charlotte Wentworth, the bride, her lace gown catching the sunlight like a cascade of diamonds, her pale cheeks flushed with the thrill of her moment. Olivia Harper moved through this grandeur with the quiet precision of someone who knew her place, or at least the place others assigned her. A black woman of striking beauty, her amber eyes held a depth that seemed to see beyond the glittering surface. Her braided hair was swept neatly beneath a starched cap, and her black apron clung to her frame, its crisp lines a stark contrast to the extravagance around her. She was a maid, invisible to most, her hands deft as she adjusted a centerpiece on the long banquet table. A crystal vase heavy with white peonies had shifted an inch, not fallen, not cracked, but enough to draw the wrong kind of attention. "You're just a lowly maid," Charlotte's voice sliced through the chatter like a shard of broken glass. The pavilion fell silent, as if the world itself had caught its breath. Forks hovered mid-air, laughter died on lips, and every eye turned to the center of the storm. Olivia froze, her fingers still grazing the vase, her heart a steady drumbeat against the sudden quiet. Charlotte stood tall, her gown shimmering with pearl embroidery, but her face was a mask of fury. She pointed at the vase, her voice rising. "Look at this mess. Is it so hard to do your job properly? This is my wedding, not some back alley cookout." The words landed like a slap, their venom sharpened by the crowd's stillness. Olivia's breath slowed, her body rooted to the spot, but her gaze never wavered. She had heard condescension before, veiled in polite smiles or whispered asides, but this was raw, unfiltered. The guests, senators, heiresses, men in tailored suits, watched, some with discomfort, others with a flicker of agreement. Olivia felt the weight of their stares, each one a pinprick against her skin, but she stood straighter, her hands steady. Charlotte's mother, Evelyn Wentworth, stepped forward, her tailored cream suit as sharp as her expression, her lips curled into a sneer, as if she'd bitten something sour. "You people should know better than to touch what doesn't belong to you," she said, her voice low but deliberate. The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, heavy with intent, its edges cutting deeper than Charlotte's outburst. Evelyn's eyes raked over Olivia's skin, lingering on the contrast between her dark hands and the pristine tablecloth. "We pay for precision," she continued, "not clumsiness. Frankly, we expected the agency to be more selective." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a soft wave of assent from those who saw nothing wrong with Evelyn's words. Olivia's fingers tightened briefly on the vase, its cool surface grounding her. She knew this script, had lived it in countless small moments, but today it was playing out on a stage far grander than any she'd faced before. The guests' whispers grew, a restless hum, but Olivia remained still, her silence louder than their noise. She could feel the heat of Charlotte's glare, the cold judgment in Evelyn's eyes, and the collective expectation that she would bend, apologize, and disappear. Charlotte crossed her arms, her voice dripping with venom. "If you want to keep your job, you'd better get on your knees and apologize, publicly." The demand landed like a guillotine, its audacity drawing gasps from the crowd. A woman in a sapphire dress clutched her pearls. A man at a nearby table leaned forward, as if waiting for the spectacle to unfold. Olivia's chest tightened, not with fear, but with a clarity that burned through the haze of humiliation. She straightened, her shoulders squared, and met Charlotte's gaze with unflinching calm. "I've apologized for the vase," Olivia said, her voice steady, each word measured. "I'll fix it, but I won't kneel." The words hung in the air, simple yet seismic, a refusal that seemed to crack the very foundation of the pavilion. Charlotte's face reddened, her lips parting in disbelief. "You people always play the victim," she spat, "acting like you belong in our world." The crowd's murmurs swelled, a mix of shock and unease, but Olivia didn't flinch. Her hands, dusted with the faint scent of peonies, remained steady. She was no longer just a maid in their eyes. She was a mirror, reflecting truths they'd rather not see. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice a hiss. "You're nothing but background, girl. Know your place." The insult was meant to shrink her, to reduce her to a shadow, but Olivia's gaze didn't falter. She felt the weight of generations in her spine, the silent strength of those who'd endured far worse than words. The vase, still intact, gleamed in the sunlight, a silent witness to the moment. The guests watched, their silence complicit, their eyes darting between the bride, her mother, and the maid who dared to stand tall. The tension stretched taut, a string ready to snap. Olivia's heart pounded, but her face betrayed nothing. No fear, no shame, only a quiet resolve that seemed to unsettle the Wentworths more than any outburst could. Charlotte's hands clenched, her gown rustling as she took a step forward, ready to unleash another tirade. Evelyn's lips parted, her next barb poised on her tongue, but in that suspended moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next, for the spark that would ignite or extinguish the fire. Olivia stood, unbowed, her amber eyes a beacon in the storm. She was no longer invisible, no longer background. She was Olivia Harper, and in her refusal to kneel, she had shattered the silence that bound her, setting the stage for a reckoning no one could have foreseen. The pavilion at Willowcrest Estate hung in a suffocating hush, the air thick with the aftershock of Olivia Harper's refusal. Charlotte Wentworth stood rigid, her lace gown a cascade of light, but her face twisted with fury, her demand for Olivia to kneel unanswered. The black maid's steady words, "I won't kneel," echoed in the silence. A pebble dropped in a still pond, its ripples unsettling the polished crowd. Guests shifted in their seats, their silk dresses rustling, their eyes darting between the bride and the woman who dared defy her. Evelyn Wentworth's sneer lingered, her tailored suit a shield of authority, but even she seemed momentarily unbalanced. Her next barb caught in her throat. The moment teetered on a knife's edge, poised to erupt or collapse. Then a voice cut through the tension, low and resonant, like thunder rolling in from a distant storm. "What did you just say?" Every head turned, the crowd's collective gaze swiveling toward the floral arch at the pavilion's heart. Daniel Thornton, the groom, stepped forward, his tailored tuxedo framing his tall, broad-shouldered frame. His blue eyes burned with a fire that seemed to consume the space between him and Charlotte. His jaw was set, his hands unclenched but deliberate, as if he were holding back a tide of emotion that threatened to break free. The sunlight caught the silver cufflinks at his wrists, glinting like sparks, and for a moment he seemed larger than the opulent setting, a man stepping out of the script everyone expected him to follow. Charlotte blinked, her fury faltering under the weight of his stare. "Darling," she stammered, her voice softening, seeking to reclaim control. "She disrespected me. She ruined the centerpiece, made a mockery of our day." Her words were a plea, a desperate attempt to pull him back to her side, to restore the illusion of their perfect union. But Daniel's gaze didn't soften. He took another step, his polished shoes clicking against the stone floor, each sound a punctuation mark in the unraveling drama. The crowd leaned forward, sensing a shift, their whispers swallowed by the gravity of his presence. "Disrespected you?" Daniel's voice was steady, but it carried an edge, sharp enough to cut through the pretense. "You disrespected my father." The words landed like a blow, and Charlotte froze, her lips parting in shock. The guests murmured, confusion rippling through the pavilion. Daniel's eyes never left her, his voice growing colder, more deliberate. My black father, who raised me, who taught me what it means to be a man. He's sitting in the front row today, watching you spew venom at Olivia, a woman who did nothing but stand her ground. When you talk to her like that, you're not just insulting her, you're insulting him, and you're insulting me. The revelation hung in the air, a truth so raw it seemed to crack the polished veneer of the wedding. Guests turned to look at the front row where Harold Thornton sat, a distinguished black man in a charcoal suit, his face unreadable, but his eyes fixed on his son. Some in the crowd gasped, others shifted uncomfortably, their assumptions about Daniel's heritage crumbling. Charlotte's cheeks flushed a deeper red, her hands trembling as she clutched the folds of her gown. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice sharp with urgency. Daniel, let's take this privately. There's no need for a scene. Daniel raised a hand, silencing her with a look that brooked no argument. No, he said, his voice a quiet command. You made this public. You both did. He turned to the guests, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Senators, heiresses, men with gold watches, women in sapphire and emerald. The weight of their attention was palpable, but Daniel stood taller, his resolve a beacon in the chaos. I won't marry into a family that sees people like Olivia as less than human, he declared, his words ringing with finality. I won't stand beside someone who thinks skin color defines worth. The pavilion seemed to contract, the air growing heavier with each syllable. Charlotte took a step toward him, her voice cracking. Daniel, you're overreacting. This is our day. But he cut her off, his expression unyielding. I'm seeing clearly for the first time. With deliberate calm, he slid the platinum ring from his finger, its surface catching the sunlight one last time. He held it for a moment, as if weighing the life it represented, then dropped it into Charlotte's trembling hand. The soft clink of metal against her palm was deafening, a sound that shattered the dream of their union. Gasps erupted, a wave of shock rolling through the crowd. Chairs scraped against the stone floor as guests stood, some retreating in disbelief, others shaking their heads, their murmurs swelling into a restless hum. A woman in a velvet hat clutched her husband's arm, whispering. He walked away. A man at a corner table muttered, all because of her, his tone a mix of awe and unease. Charlotte's face crumpled, her eyes darting wildly for support, but the crowd offered none. Her allies, the ones who'd nodded at Evelyn's barbs, now averted their gazes, their silence a betrayal. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it, her authority dissolving like mist in the face of Daniel's defiance. Olivia stood still, her hands no longer trembling, the crystal vase forgotten beside her. She hadn't spoken since her refusal, hadn't moved, but her presence was a quiet force, a counterpoint to the chaos. Her amber eyes met Daniel's for a fleeting moment, and in them, he saw not gratitude but recognition, a shared understanding of what it meant to stand when the world demanded you kneel. She was no longer just a maid, she was a witness, her silence louder than any shout. The pavilion descended into pandemonium. Guests whispered furiously, some slipping toward the exits, their champagne flutes abandoned. Charlotte clutched the ring, her gown wilting around her like a dying flower. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists, her face a mask of impotent rage. Daniel turned, his back to the wreckage of the wedding, and walked toward the arch, his steps measured but resolute. The sunlight framed him, casting his shadow long and unyielding, a man who had chosen truth over tradition. Olivia watched him go, her heart a steady rhythm against the cacophony. She felt the sting of every stare, the weight of the moment pressing against her. But she stood tall, her apron a badge of her defiance. The wedding was over, the illusion shattered, and in its place something raw and real had taken root. The guests' voices rose, a chorus of shock and speculation, but Olivia heard none of it. She had stood, and Daniel had stood with her, and in that shared act of courage, the world had shifted, if only for a moment. The pavilion at Willowcrest Estate hung in a suffocating hush, the air thick with the aftershock of Olivia Harper's refusal. Charlotte Wentworth stood rigid, her lace gown a cascade of light, but her face twisted with fury, her demand for Olivia to kneel unanswered. The black maid's steady words, "I won't kneel," echoed in the silence. A pebble dropped in a still pond, its ripples unsettling the polished crowd. Guests shifted in their seats, their silk dresses rustling, their eyes darting between the bride and the woman who dared defy her. Evelyn Wentworth's sneer lingered, her tailored suit a shield of authority, but even she seemed momentarily unbalanced. Her next barb caught in her throat. The moment teetered on a knife's edge, poised to erupt or collapse. Then a voice cut through the tension, low and resonant, like thunder rolling in from a distant storm. "What did you just say?" Every head turned, the crowd's collective gaze swiveling toward the floral arch at the pavilion's heart. Daniel Thornton, the groom, stepped forward, his tailored tuxedo framing his tall, broad-shouldered frame. His blue eyes burned with a fire that seemed to consume the space between him and Charlotte. His jaw was set, his hands unclenched but deliberate, as if he were holding back a tide of emotion that threatened to break free. The sunlight caught the silver cufflinks at his wrists, glinting like sparks, and for a moment he seemed larger than the opulent setting, a man stepping out of the script everyone expected him to follow. Charlotte blinked, her fury faltering under the weight of his stare. "Darling," she stammered, her voice softening, seeking to reclaim control. "She disrespected me. She ruined the centerpiece, made a mockery of our day." Her words were a plea, a desperate attempt to pull him back to her side, to restore the illusion of their perfect union. But Daniel's gaze didn't soften. He took another step, his polished shoes clicking against the stone floor, each sound a punctuation mark in the unraveling drama. The crowd leaned forward, sensing a shift, their whispers swallowed by the gravity of his presence. "Disrespected you?" Daniel's voice was steady, but it carried an edge, sharp enough to cut through the pretense. "You disrespected my father." The words landed like a blow, and Charlotte froze, her lips parting in shock. The guests murmured, confusion rippling through the pavilion. Daniel's eyes never left her, his voice growing colder, more deliberate. "My black father, who raised me, who taught me what it means to be a man, he's sitting in the front row today, watching you spew venom at Olivia, a woman who did nothing but stand her ground. When you talk to her like that, you're not just insulting her, you're insulting him, and you're insulting me." The revelation hung in the air, a truth so raw it seemed to crack the polished veneer of the wedding. Guests turned to look at the front row, where Harold Thornton sat, a distinguished black man in a charcoal suit, his face unreadable, but his eyes fixed on his son. Some in the crowd gasped, others shifted uncomfortably, their assumptions about Daniel's heritage crumbling. Charlotte's cheeks flushed a deeper red, her hands trembling as she clutched the folds of her gown. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice sharp with urgency. "Daniel, let's take this privately. There's no need for a scene." Daniel raised a hand, silencing her with a look that brooked no argument. "No," he said, his voice a quiet command. "You made this public. You both did." He turned to the guests, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, senators, heiresses, men with gold watches, women in sapphire and emerald. The weight of their attention was palpable, but Daniel stood taller, his resolve a beacon in the chaos. "I won't marry into a family that sees people like Olivia as less than human," he declared, his words ringing with finality. "I won't stand beside someone who thinks skin color defines worth." The pavilion seemed to contract, the air growing heavier with each syllable. Charlotte took a step toward him, her voice cracking. "Daniel, you're overreacting. This is our day." But he cut her off, his expression unyielding. "I'm seeing clearly for the first time." With deliberate calm, he slid the platinum ring from his finger, its surface catching the sunlight one last time. He held it for a moment, as if weighing the life it represented, then dropped it into Charlotte's trembling hand. The soft clink of metal against her palm was deafening, a sound that shattered the dream of their union. Gasps erupted, a wave of shock rolling through the crowd. Chairs scraped against the stone floor as guests stood, some retreating in disbelief, others shaking their heads, their murmurs swelling into a restless hum. A woman in a velvet hat clutched her husband's arm, whispering. He walked away. A man at a corner table muttered, All because of her, his tone a mix of awe and unease. Charlotte's face crumpled, her eyes darting wildly for support, but the crowd offered none. Her allies, the ones who'd nodded at Evelyn's barbs, now averted their gazes, their silence a betrayal. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it, her authority dissolving like mist in the face of Daniel's defiance. Olivia stood still, her hands no longer trembling, the crystal vase forgotten beside her. She hadn't spoken since her refusal, hadn't moved, but her presence was a quiet force, a counterpoint to the chaos. Her amber eyes met Daniel's for a fleeting moment, and in them he saw not gratitude but recognition, a shared understanding of what it meant to stand when the world demanded you kneel. She was no longer just a maid, she was a witness, her silence louder than any shout. The pavilion descended into pandemonium. Guests whispered furiously, some slipping toward the exits, their champagne flutes abandoned. Charlotte clutched the ring, her gown wilting around her like a dying flower. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists, her face a mask of impotent rage. Daniel turned, his back to the wreckage of the wedding, and walked toward the arch, his steps measured but resolute. The sunlight framed him, casting his shadow long and unyielding, a man who had chosen truth over tradition. Olivia watched him go, her heart a steady rhythm against the cacophony. She felt the sting of every stare, the weight of the moment pressing against her. But she stood tall, her apron a badge of her defiance. The wedding was over, the illusion shattered, and in its place something raw and real had taken root. The guests' voices rose, a chorus of shock and speculation. But Olivia heard none of it. She had stood, and Daniel had stood with her. And in that shared act of courage, the world had shifted, if only for a moment. The pavilion's chaos faded behind Olivia Harper as she walked away, her steps deliberate, each one a quiet rebellion against the weight of the moment. The Willowcrest estate, with its glittering chandeliers and silk-draped tables, seemed to shrink in her wake, its opulence no match for the fire in her chest. Her black apron clung to her frame, the name tag pinned slightly askew, a small imperfection that felt like a badge of her defiance. The sunlight filtered through ancient oaks, casting dappled shadows across the stone path. But Olivia felt no warmth, only the prickling sting of 100 eyes tracking her retreat. She had refused to kneel, had stood tall when Charlotte Wentworth and her mother Evelyn demanded her humiliation. And now the world was watching, waiting to see what that choice would cost her. Her heart beat steadily, a metronome against the distant hum of shocked whispers from the wedding guests. "Did that happen?" a woman's voice murmured, laced with disbelief. "He walked away because of her," another said, the words tinged with awe rather than anger. Olivia kept moving, her amber eyes fixed ahead, refusing to let the crowd's gaze pull her back. She passed the banquet table, where the crystal vase of peonies stood untouched, its slight shift the spark that had ignited this firestorm. Her hands, still dusted with the faint scent of flowers, were steady, but her mind churned with the reality of what lay ahead. Blame, consequences, the fragility of her place in this world. She reached the staff station, a small enclave tucked behind ivy-covered walls, where the clatter of ice bins and serving trays offered a fleeting refuge. Jasmine, a young pastry assistant with wide eyes and a nervous smile, stood waiting, her apron smudged with flour. "Olivia," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement, "did Daniel really cancel the wedding because of what Charlotte said to you?" Olivia paused, her breath catching as she met Jasmine's gaze. The question hung between them, innocent yet heavy, demanding an answer that felt too big for the moment. "He canceled it because of what he believes," Olivia said, her voice low but even. "I just happened to be the reason he spoke up." Jasmine's mouth fell open, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. "But you stood there, Olivia. You didn't let them break you." The words were a spark, a reminder of the power in her refusal, but Olivia felt no triumph, only the weight of what was coming. She nodded, managing a small smile, and turned to gather her things, the routine motion grounding her against the storm brewing inside. The other staff members, busboys, servers, a dishwasher wiping sweat from his brow, watched her with a mix of awe and apprehension, their silence louder than any words. The door to the manager's office opened with a soft creak, and Mr. Caldwell, the estate's overseer, beckoned her inside. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his suit impeccable, but his face was grim, etched with the strain of a man caught between duty and disaster. The office was small, its white cabinets and faded employee posters a stark contrast to the grandeur outside. Caldwell closed the door and folded his arms, his eyes studying Olivia for a long moment before he spoke. "This is a disaster, Olivia," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The Wentworths were our biggest clients. They're threatening to pull their contracts, and the phones are already ringing with media." Olivia stood tall, her shoulders squared, the same resolve that had carried her through the pavilion, now anchoring her here. "I didn't raise my voice," she said, her tone steady. "I didn't touch her. I didn't cause a scene." Caldwell sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You didn't kneel." The words hung between them, not an accusation, but a fact, heavy with consequence. Olivia met his gaze, unflinching. "No, I didn't." For a moment something flickered in Caldwell's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or resignation. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "The Wentworths are furious," he continued. "They're telling everyone the wedding was sabotaged by staff. You're at the center of it." Her chest tightened, not with surprise, but with the clarity of what this meant. The Wentworths' influence stretched far beyond this estate, into boardrooms, social circles, the very agency that employed her. She could already imagine the headlines, the whispers that would paint her as the villain, the angry black woman who dared to disrupt a fairy tale wedding. Yet she felt no regret, only a quiet certainty that she had done what was right. "So am I fired?" she asked, her voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. Caldwell hesitated, his fingers drumming against his arm. "Technically, no," he said finally. "But I'm putting you on paid leave until this blows over. It's the best I can do." The words were a reprieve, but they carried a warning. The storm was far from over. Olivia nodded, her heart oddly steady despite the uncertainty. "May I collect my things?" she asked. Caldwell stepped aside, his silence an answer. She left the office, the weight of his words settling like dust on her shoulders. In the break room, her bag waited in the cubby marked with her initials, a small canvas satchel that held her keys, her phone, her life beyond these walls. As she slung it over her shoulder, the door swung open, and Marcus, a young barback with dreadlocks and squeaky sneakers, stepped inside. His eyes burned with a fire she hadn't seen before. "I saw it all, Olivia," he said, his voice low but fierce. "That wasn't just rude, it was hate. You didn't just stand there, you made a stand." The words caught her off guard, a spark of connection in the haze of her thoughts. "I wasn't trying to make a scene," she said softly, almost to herself. Marcus shook his head, his sneakers squeaking as he stepped closer. "You didn't. You showed us how to be seen." His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with admiration, the kind that comes from someone who spent years being invisible. Olivia looked at him, this kid who cleaned up spilled champagne for strangers, who smiled through being ignored, and saw something new in his eyes, pride not for himself but for her. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stepped into the parking lot, the gravel crunching under her shoes, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and exhaust. Her old sedan waited at the far end, its faded blue paint a reminder of the life she'd built, fragile but hers. She was halfway there when footsteps crunched behind her. "Olivia." She turned, startled to see Daniel Thornton, his tie loosened, his tuxedo jacket gone. His face was weary but resolute, his blue eyes searching hers. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I just needed to say, you stood when you didn't have to, and I saw it." Olivia frowned, the weight of the day pressing against her. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Thornton." He shook his head. "I think I do." He paused as if searching for words, then added, "If you hadn't stood, I might have ignored the voice in my head telling me this was wrong." She studied him, the man who'd walked away from a wedding, from a life, because of her refusal. "You'd have figured it out," she said quietly. "Maybe," he replied, his voice heavy, "but maybe not in time." He turned to leave, his silhouette fading into the golden light. But Olivia called after him. Daniel, he looked back. Thank you for seeing what they didn't. A faint smile touched his lips. My father taught me to know better. And then he was gone, leaving Olivia alone with the cost of her stand, a job in limbo, a name in the spotlight, and a spark of something new, burning quietly within her. The gravel crunched under Olivia Harper's shoes as she stood beside her faded blue sedan, the Willow Crest Estate's grandeur now a distant hum behind her. The parking lot was quiet, the jasmine-scented air heavy with the weight of what she'd just endured and defied. Her black apron hung loosely, her name tag glinting faintly in the fading light, a silent testament to the stand she'd taken. Daniel Thornton's parting words, "You stood when you didn't have to," echoed in her mind, a spark in the gathering dusk of her uncertainty. She had walked away from a wedding in ruins, her job teetering on the edge. But something new stirred within her, a fragile hope that refused to be snuffed out. Her phone buzzed against the canvas of her satchel, a relentless vibration that pulled her from her thoughts. She fished it out, the screen ablaze with notifications, texts, voicemails, a flood of alerts that felt like an intrusion. Jasmine, the pastry assistant, had sent a frantic message. Olivia, you're everywhere. Check the news. Marcus, the barback, followed. They're talking about you on TV, not in a bad way. Her heart quickened, not with pride, but with a wary unease. She climbed into her car, the familiar creak of the door grounding her, and opened the news app. A headline screamed across the screen, "Just Alowly Maid trends as wedding incident goes viral." Below it, a shaky cell phone video replayed the moment, Charlotte Wentworth's venomous tirade, Olivia's calm refusal, and Daniel's ring hitting Charlotte's palm. The footage played like a scene from a film, but it was her life, her name, her skin. Olivia's breath caught as the anchor's voice cut in. The wedding of Charlotte Wentworth and Daniel Thornton, CEO of Thornton Hospitality, was called off after the bride and her mother verbally attacked a black maid, Olivia Harper, in what many are calling a blatant act of racial discrimination. The words sank into her, heavy and surreal. She turned off the phone, the silence of her car a fragile shield against the world's sudden clamor. She wasn't ready for this. Not the spotlight, not the scrutiny, not the weight of being a symbol. Back at her small apartment, the morning light spilled through cracked blinds, bouncing off the worn linoleum floor. Olivia sat at her kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling untouched before her. The television flickered, replaying the video again, now with a scrolling ticker. Viral wedding incident sparks outrage. Her phone buzzed again. 53 notifications. Voicemails piled up, some from reporters hungry for a quote, others from strangers. A woman's voice cracked through one message. "My sister's a maid. She's been through what you went through. Thank you for not kneeling." Another from a man in a gravelly baritone. "You showed them, Miss Harper. Keep standing." But the online comments were a mixed tide. Some praised her courage, others spat venom. She ruined a wedding for attention. Another angry black woman causing trouble. The hate stung, not because it was new, but because it was loud, amplified by the world's sudden gaze. She pushed the phone away and stood, needing movement to quiet the storm in her mind. The apartment was modest, its walls adorned with a single-frame photo of her mother, smiling in a faded sundress, her eyes carrying the same amber fire as Olivia's. She traced the frame, grounding herself in the memory of a woman who'd worked 3 jobs and never bowed. The thought steadied her, a reminder that she'd faced worse than words before and come through stronger. A knock at the door startled her. Ruth, a veteran server with a warm smile and arms full of brown paper bags, stood there, her presence a balm. "Brought you lunch, child," Ruth said, setting out collard greens and cornbread that smelled of home. They sat together, the food warming the small space as much as Ruth's company. "They're panicking," Ruth said, dabbing her napkin. "Evelyn Wentworth's PR team called it a misunderstanding, but they lost 2 sponsors already. Charlotte's father is keeping his distance." Olivia didn't smile. She didn't want to revel in their fall, but she felt the world shifting, a balance tipping ever so slightly. Ruth leaned in, her eyes sharp. "You cracked something open, Olivia. People are talking. Servers, maids, folks who've swallowed their pride for a paycheck. You gave them a voice. Olivia stirred her sweet tea, her voice quiet. I just didn't want to be humiliated. Ruth's gaze softened. And in doing that, you gave others permission to stand. The words settled into Olivia, heavy with meaning, but she wasn't ready to embrace them. Not yet. Later her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Olivia, Daniel's voice came through low and steady. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Her heart quickened, surprised by the call. No, it's fine, she said, her voice cautious. I wanted to talk about something, he continued. I run Thornton Hospitality, and we're opening a new restaurant in Atlanta. Rise, it's small, community-driven, built on dignity and diversity. I want you on the leadership team, managing operations, shaping culture. You see the world clearly, and you don't flinch when it matters. The offer hung in the air, as unexpected as it was bold. Olivia's mind raced. Her, a leader? She was a maid, not a manager. Her resume, a patchwork of service jobs, not boardroom credentials. You're offering me a job? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I'm offering you a chance to build something better, Daniel replied, his tone earnest. I saw how you stood, Olivia. That's the kind of strength we need. She brushed a curl from her face, the weight of the day crashing into her. I don't have a degree, she said. I've never led a team. You led by example, he countered. That's more than most executives ever do. His words were a challenge, a call to step into a role she'd never imagined. She thought of the wedding, of Charlotte's sneer, of the voicemails thanking her for standing. The world was watching, and for the first time, she felt it might be ready for her to rise. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady but soft. Fair enough, Daniel replied, a smile in his tone. Take your time. As the call ended, Olivia stood at her window, the city skyline flickering in the distance. The viral video, the hate, the praise, it all swirled around her. But Daniel's offer was a lifeline, a chance to turn her stand into something lasting. She didn't know if she was ready, but the spark within her grew brighter, fueled by the voices of strangers, the memory of her mother, and the quiet certainty that she had already begun to change the world. She picked up her phone, opened Jasmine's text, and typed a single word. Okay. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of everything. The scent of rosemary and warm cornbread filled the air as Olivia Harper stepped through the doors of Rise, the new restaurant that had become her crucible. The space was a far cry from the opulent Willowcrest estate, its exposed brick walls and polished wooden floors radiating a quiet warmth that felt like home. Soft amber lights hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over tables set with simple linen napkins, each one folded with care. The restaurant buzzed with anticipation, its opening night a beacon of something new in Atlanta, a place where dignity wasn't just served, but woven into every detail. Olivia, now a manager, wore a rust-colored blouse and navy slacks, her braided hair pulled into an elegant bun, her amber eyes sharp with purpose. Her old apron was gone, but the resolve that had carried her through that fateful wedding remained, burning brighter than ever. A brass plaque gleamed at the entrance, its words etched in bold relief. Inspired by Olivia Harper, who stood for dignity. She paused before it, her fingers brushing the cool metal, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought her here. The plaque was Daniel Thornton's idea, a tribute to the moment she refused to kneel, but to Olivia it was more, a promise to those who entered that they would be seen, not as background, but as equals. The staff, a vibrant mix of locals from Atlanta's underserved neighborhoods, moved with a shared purpose, their laughter mingling with the clink of glassware as they prepared for the soft launch. Olivia led them with an empathy born of experience, remembering their names, checking on their nerves, ensuring no one felt invisible. The dining room filled with community leaders, elders from local churches, teachers, small business owners, each invited to share a meal that was more than food. It was a statement. Ruth, the veteran server who'd brought Olivia lunch in her darkest hour, stood in the kitchen, her hands deftly seasoning collard greens, her gospel playlist humming low. Marcus, the barback turned bartender, polished glasses with a grin, his dreadlocks swaying as he bantered with a line cook. Jasmine, now a pastry assistant with growing confidence, arranged peach cobblers on a tray, her eyes darting to Olivia for approval. Olivia nodded, her smile a quiet encouragement, and the team pulsed with a unity that felt sacred, like a family forged in fire. As guests took their seats, the air thrummed with anticipation. Olivia moved among the tables, greeting each person with a warmth that disarmed even the most reserved. An elderly woman with graying braids clasped her hand, whispering, "This place feels like home, child." A young father, his sons fidgeting in their chairs, leaned in. "You're showing them what's possible, Miss Harper." Olivia's chest tightened, not with pride but with responsibility. She was no longer just serving tables. She was building them. The menu, printed on simple cardstock, offered dishes rooted in heritage: fried catfish, sweet potato pie, and cornbread with honey glaze. Each bite was a celebration, a reclamation of stories too often overlooked. Daniel Thornton stood near the bar, his tuxedo replaced by a rolled-sleeve shirt, his blue eyes scanning the room with quiet pride. He caught Olivia's gaze and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared vision. But the night's rhythm faltered when a message appeared on Olivia's phone. It sent her a name she hadn't expected: Charlotte Wentworth. "I'm sorry for what I said," it read. "I was overwhelmed. Please forgive me." The words felt hollow, typed from a distance, lacking the weight of true remorse. Olivia stared at the screen, her jaw tightening, then set the phone aside. This night was for Rise, not for revisiting old wounds. The soft launch reached its crescendo when Harold Thornton, Daniel's black father, entered, his charcoal suit commanding yet warm. The room quieted as he approached Olivia, his salt and pepper beard framing a face etched with experience. "I saw the video," he said, his voice low but resonant. "You stood like my mother did, wiping tables no one noticed, never bowing. You've built something extraordinary here." His words landed like a benediction, and Olivia's throat tightened. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she managed, her voice soft but steady. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes gleaming. "I want to help, quietly. Scholarships, food trucks for East Atlanta's youth. Name it, and it's yours." Olivia's heart raced. The offer was as bold as it was genuine. "We'll start with the kids," she said, her voice firm. "Give them something they can own." Harold nodded, a smile breaking through his stoic demeanor. "You're a leader, Olivia. Don't ever doubt it." As he moved to his table, the room seemed to breathe again, the guests' laughter rising like a tide. Daniel raised a glass of sweet tea, his voice rich with conviction. "To dignity," he said, his eyes finding Olivia's. "Not given, but chosen, defended, lived." And to Olivia, who reminded us that standing tall is about purpose, not posture. The room erupted in applause, glasses clinking, voices swelling with agreement. Olivia stood near the plaque, her hands clasped, her face flushed but composed. The media had begun circling, reporters from CNN, podcast hosts, even a local news van parked outside. But Olivia deflected their requests with quiet resolve. "This isn't about headlines," she told a persistent journalist. "It's about what we're building here." She wanted authenticity, not spectacle, a space where people could gather without pretense. As the night wound down, Ruth pulled Olivia aside, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You didn't just open a restaurant, baby. You opened a door." Olivia smiled, the weight of the words settling into her. She walked the dining room one last time, her fingers trailing along the tables, each one a testament to the team's labor, the community's trust, her own unyielding spirit. The last guests lingered, their stories spilling over dessert, their laughter a melody that filled the space. Marcus caught her eye, his grin wide. "We did it, Olivia." She nodded, her voice soft. "We're just getting started." Outside, the city skyline flickered, its lights a constellation of possibility. Olivia stood at the door, the plaque's words glowing behind her. Rise was more than a restaurant. It was a movement, a promise that no one would be asked to kneel for dignity. She felt her mother's presence, a quiet strength in her bones, and knew this was only the beginning of what she could build. The world was watching, but for the first time, Olivia was ready to meet its gaze, not as a maid, but as a leader, her stand a spark that had ignited a fire no one could extinguish. The amber glow of Rice's fairy lights spilled into the private garden, where Olivia Harper stood beneath a willow tree, its branches swaying like whispers in the evening breeze. The restaurant hummed behind her, its brick walls and warm tables a testament to the movement she'd built. Tonight, however, was different, a moment of reckoning, not with the world, but with a ghost from her past. Charlotte Wentworth stepped through the garden gate, her silhouette thinner, her face pale under careful makeup. Gone were the diamonds and lace of her wedding day. She wore a charcoal sweater and flats, clutching a bouquet of sunflowers, their golden petals trembling in her hands. Olivia's heart quickened, not with fear, but with a curious calm, as if the universe had orchestrated this encounter to test the strength she'd forged. "Olivia," Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you came." Olivia crossed her arms, her rust blouse catching the light, her amber eyes steady. "You didn't ask for a table," she replied, her tone flat but not unkind. "Just words." Charlotte swallowed, extending the sunflowers. I know they're not enough, but I couldn't come empty-handed." Olivia accepted the bouquet, setting it gently on a bistro table, its surface scarred from countless shared meals. "Let's talk here," she said, gesturing to the chairs beneath the willow, where the wind chimes' soft notes filled the silence. They sat, the space between them heavy with unspoken history. Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap, her eyes darting to the ground. "I didn't recognize myself that day," she began, her voice trembling. "At the wedding, I mean. But I also did, and that's what scared me." Olivia listened, her face composed, giving nothing away. Charlotte's words spilled out, raw and halting. "I thought I had values, that I saw people clearly, but when I felt threatened, socially, emotionally, the ugliest part of me spoke. I demanded you kneel, Olivia, and I've replayed it 1,000 times. When you didn't, when you stood so calm and proud, something in me cracked. I hated it then, but now, I think I was envious." Olivia leaned back, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't just demand I kneel," she said, her voice low but piercing. "You saw my skin and decided I was less. You were about to marry a man raised by a black father, a man who offered you his life, and you tried to tame his pride." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, her head bowing. "I know," she whispered. "I lost more than a wedding that day. I lost him. I lost myself." She looked up, her voice breaking. "I'm not here to beg forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But to thank you for waking me up, for making me look in the mirror." The words caught Olivia off guard, a spark of sincerity cutting through her skepticism. She studied Charlotte, the woman who'd once stood in a lace gown, hurling venom before a crowd, now diminished, not by defeat but by self-awareness. Olivia's chest tightened, not with pity but with the weight of what this moment meant, a chance to close a wound or let it fester. "Do you know what it's like," she said quietly, "to carry generations of silence in your spine, to be told over and over that you don't belong unless you bow?" Charlotte nodded slowly, tears spilling. "I'm beginning to," Olivia corrected her, her voice firm but not cruel. "You're beginning to listen. That matters." Charlotte stood, her hands trembling. "What happens now?" Olivia rose, her silhouette framed by the willow's swaying branches. "Now you keep listening. You uplift voices that aren't yours. You don't expect applause for doing the bare minimum?" Charlotte nodded, a fragile resolve in her eyes. Olivia extended her hand, a gesture neither of forgiveness nor absolution, but of a beginning. Charlotte took it, the touch brief but real, then turned and left, her footsteps fading into the night. Later inside Rise, Olivia closed out the registers, the dining room now quiet, its tables cleared but still warm with the memory of laughter. She sent her team home with hugs, Ruth's gospel playlist lingering in the air, Marcus's grin a quiet reassurance. Outside, Marcus waited by her car, his dreadlocks catching the streetlight's glow. "I saw her leave," he said, leaning against the hood. "She needed to," Olivia replied, her voice steady. He smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. You always know how to make people see themselves. They drove to a community center downtown where Marcus had launched monthly dinners for those without family, without warmth, without dignity. Rise catered it now, free of charge, and tonight marked the debut of the No Kneeling Needed mentorship program, designed to empower young women of color in hospitality. Olivia stood at the front, microphone in hand, the room packed with servers, busboys, single mothers, and retired chefs. When I was told to kneel, she began, her voice resonant, I stood still, not out of defiance, but because my ancestors had knelt for centuries. I didn't need to. The crowd held its breath, some nodding, others wiping tears. We teach young women to plate food, pour wine, fold napkins like orchids, but tonight we teach them to stand with pride, with strength, with grace. Applause erupted, a wave of affirmation that shook the room. Olivia's eyes found a girl, no older than 17, serving an elder with trembling hands but a bright smile. The girl caught her gaze, straightened her back and grinned, a spark of the future Olivia was building. Marcus joined her, his voice low. You didn't just feed people tonight, Olivia. You healed them. She looked around at the laughter, the shared plates, the voices rising in harmony. No, she whispered, we did. As the night ended, Olivia lingered, her fingers tracing the edge of a table, its wood worn but strong. Outside, the stars gleamed, clearer than ever, and the community center glowed like a beacon. Rise wasn't just a restaurant, it was a legacy, unbowed and unbroken, built for every soul who'd been told to kneel when they were meant to rise. Olivia stepped into the night, her heart full, knowing she'd written a new script, not just for herself but for all who'd follow. The wind carried her mother's strength, and in its whisper she heard a truth. This was justice, not with sirens or courts, but with a table where everyone had a seat. Wow, what a powerful journey with Olivia Harper, who transformed a moment of injustice into a beacon of dignity. What moved you most about her story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. How does Olivia's courage inspire you to stand tall? Drop your city too and connect with our community. A huge thank you for joining us on this unforgettable ride. Don't miss our next story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay in the loop. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and let's keep the conversation going. Comment, subscribe, and we'll see you soon for more tales that spark change.